The recording. Okay, good evening to all. We're going to mute everyone for now. We're going to have tonight a brief opportunity to review a few of the halachas that relate to the 3 weeks. Historically, we know very well that the tragic events of Tisha B'Av started already on the 17th of Tammuz. This is information that we know from our sources, from the Talmud, that Shivas or B'Tammuz is when the wall was breached. We have more information from Josephus, because Josephus gives us a precise location of what wall was breached, and he too gives us the date of the 17th of Tammuz. And there's also the old tradition that Kol Over Hisigura Ben HaMitzarim, that all our enemies caught up to us, Bein HaMitzarim. So we link the concept of a location where enemies capture us to this period of time, and therefore we call these 3 weeks, starting next Thursday with Shivas or B'Tammuz, ending with Tisha B'Av as the Ben HaMitzarim. So it's not a time of celebration, but a time of reflection. We Jews believe that sadness on its own is destructive. On the other hand, when you feel sad for something, but you decide to roll up your sleeves and address the issue and try to make a difference, that's something that is good. And that's obviously what we're supposed to be focused on this period of time. And as we know very well, the rabbis tell us that the destruction of the first temple related to some very severe violations of Torah law, cardinal sins, the Avodah Zarah, Gilui Arayot, Shvichut Damim. On the other hand, when it comes to the destruction of the second temple, it had to do with baseless hatred, Sinat Chinam. And there was an old statement, there's a well-known statement made by the Nitziv, the Volozhin Rosh Yeshiva, that everyone looked at the other person, even if he was observant and a Torah Jew, and he would say, yeah, he's a heretic. In other words, if it's not my philosophy, so therefore it's a worthless approach to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And obviously the Nitziv was explaining or analyzing the period that led to the destruction of the second temple, but he was also talking about his own life, his own experiences, what he saw in the tragic Jewish world. In other words, we still have that problem today, that when we see a philosophy and approach that's a little bit different, we go ahead and label it and not realize that there are many different good ways to relate to the Almighty, to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So what we do, at least Thursday night, is study some basic halacha, and the halachic system gives us the tools and the ability to relate to the period of time. And the question we're going to be addressing today is, how much of the morning starts already on the 17th of Tammuz, which is next Thursday? In other words, when does it begin? Obviously, we all know that it intensifies, that we have some level of mourning that begins on the 17th of Tammuz. Comes Rosh Chodesh Av, we increase it a little bit more. Comes the week of Tisha B'Av, it's increased again. Erev Tisha B'Av even more. And then we reach the peak on Tisha B'Av itself. So the question is, how much really starts with Shivas or B'Tammuz? And the reason this is an interesting question is because different communities had different approaches. While the Talmud itself only makes reference to mourning during the week of Tisha B'Av, right? The week of Tisha B'Av, you don't go to work, you don't build things for pleasure, you don't launder things, right? You don't get haircuts the week of Tisha B'Av. At the same time, the Gemara does say, Meshenichnas of Mima'atim Besimcha. That is an indication that in some areas, already from the beginning of Av, you start the morning. So clearly from the beginning of Av, yes, we should be following and practicing those actions that indicate mourning. But how much do we start already from Shivas or B'Tammuz? So that's the question that we're going to be addressing today. And just to realize that often Ashkenazi minhagim originate from statements that were known as Jerusalem Talmud. So keep that information in mind as we expand and discuss this topic a little bit more. So here we go. You see in front of you section from Shulchan Aruch. So the first section you see here is from Rav Yosef Karo, where he tells us that mi Rosh Chodesh ad HaTa'anit. Okay, so from Rosh Chodesh until Tisha B'Av, and then he gives us this long list of things we are to avoid, which is called like a binyan shel simcha. You don't do construction that's not necessary for safety. You do not go ahead and launder things. You don't wear newly laundered things. And then he tells us, ve'en nosim nashim, no weddings from Rosh Chodesh. So you see, number one, that according to Rabbi Yosef Karo, the old Sephardi practice is that weddings are not to be performed from Rosh Chodesh Av until Tisha B'Av. Okay? And then he adds that the prohibition of making a party relates even if it is considered a mitzvah, ve'en osim seudat erusin, an engagement meal. And you have to remember that the engagement of the past was far more than the engagement of today. Today, the engagement is really nothing. It's just a commitment from both parties who are going to be marrying one another. In the past, the erusin was actually the first step of the marriage, and the ring was actually given months before the wedding, and that was the Sudas Erusin. Comes Rabbi Yosef Karo and tells us that it is not acceptable to have a Sudas Erusin from Rosh Chodesh Aratanis. But then he notes, Li ares belo suuda mutar. Obviously, engagement, and even giving the ring without a meal is permissible. Ve'afilu betisha be'av atzmo mutar la'ares. There's absolutely nothing wrong getting engaged on Tisha B'Av. And if you're concerned that someone else is going to get the maidel before you, you have every right to do so. Shelo yikadmeno acher. Right? This tells us that you don't just rely on bashert. You have to do your part. Right? The young boy cannot say, hey, I'm not going to shave. I'm not going to shower when I go out for the date. I'll look like a shlump. It's bashert anyway. No, it's not. There's no such thing, right? There's no such thing. Bashert, but you do your hishtadlut. You do your part. And if it's Tisha B'Av and there's a girl and she's interested in you, and by tomorrow you're not sure because there's a whole, long waiting list for the girl, you go ahead and get engaged. That's what we are told, but without a meal. So up until this point, we have what Rav Yosef Karo tells us. The prohibition begins on Rosh Chodesh Av. Comes the Hago. Hago is the Ramo, as we know. So here we are moving into the Ashkenazi world. So if you have a red state, we're going to move into the Ashkenazi world. And he tells us, V'nohagin lehachmir. We Ashkenazim have the practice of being stringent. She'ein nosim miyudzayin betamuz ve'elach. We Ashkenazim perform no weddings, and we do not have marriages from the 17th of Tammuz and on until after Tisha B'Av. So here's the source for the Ashkenazi practice. No weddings during the 3 weeks. Fine, no question about it. Ashkenazim are familiar with it. What Sephardim do, that's going to be a discussion later on. Now, there's an issue that I remember my grandfather Manes asked me years ago, and it is one that when you read the Ramah in this section of Shulchan Aruch, where he's sharing with us the laws of the 9 days, there's a problem. Because later on in this same Siman, there's another Haggah, another statement of the Ramah. And here the Ramah tells us, here the address is that there is a custom not to eat meat and not to drink wine during the 9 days. This is post-Talmudic. It is not mentioned in the Talmud. In the Talmud itself, we are told that you are not to eat meat and drink wine at Seuda HaMafsekes, the last meal before Tisha B'Av. The 9 days avoiding meat and wine is post-Talmudic. We'll find the source very soon. Nevertheless, it is a minhag Yisrael, and God forbid for anyone to go ahead and ignore it. Obviously, for health reasons, it's permissible. And obviously, for a mitzvah, it's permissible. So therefore, Havdalah you could make on wine. That's what the practice is. And so too, if you are celebrating a Seudas mitzvah, Ramot tells us, if you are participating in a Seudah that is a mitzvah, it is 100% permissible to have fleishiks and to have wine. And examples presented are Kigon Milah, a Brit Milah. Number 2, Pidyon Haben. I do remember 26 years ago. So our oldest Uzi had his bris on the second day of Av. And a friend of mine and my uncle called from Chicago that they're coming in. But they said they have one t'nai. The t'nai is that they get a fleishik meal. In other words, at that time, you couldn't afford, it was a nice sized bris here in Toronto, many family members. I wasn't going to do it fleishik. So we had the traditional cream cheese bagels, perhaps lox. But for the 2 Chicago guests, we had to have a fleishik sandwiches. So we had to order, and we got especially 2 corned beef sandwiches. So we had milchiks and fleishiks at the same meal. They had their own table, but that was their t'nai. They're going to come in if they get a fleishik sandwich, and they did. Now, so therefore, a bris milah, a pidyon haben, a seudas mitzvah, 100% you're allowed to have fleishiks. And then we are told, and so too, if it's a siyum maseches, if you are completing a tractate of Talmud, right? Or an order of the Mishnah, and you studied it, and you understood it, and you are celebrating the completion, that too is called a Sudas Mitzvah. Some note that it is only appropriate if you, in general, have the practice of making a siyum meal. But if you never make a siyum meal and only to do it on the 9 days, that's questionable. And then there are those that say that you should have a relationship with the person being Messiah. In other words, I myself do not have to complete the tractate to be part of the celebration. So therefore, if my friend completed Maseches Yevamos and he invites me to a siyum, and I hear the last few lines, I'm a participant in the Seudas Mitzvah and the siyum, and obviously I could have fleishiks and I could drink wine. But I have to have a relationship with him. On the other hand, some note that it's a problem in some restaurants. I don't know if it's still done nowadays, that they have a fleishik restaurant where every night they have a siyum, and a person makes a siyum randomly and people just come and eat. That is not so clear that a green light is given by rabbinic authorities. There's also a debate among authorities if you are allowed to leave the last few lines of a tractate for a siyum. In other words, let's say Daf Yomi completed tractate 2 months ago. So 2 months ago, I'm almost finished my Maseches, and I say to myself, wait a second, why should I make a siyum now? Let me wait another 8 weeks. I will be able to do the siyum during the first few days of Av, and as a result, I can have a fleishik meal. So there's a debate among authority if that's acceptable. So I remember I have here one of my contemporary books has a footnote that they share in the name of Reb Shimon Sofer, who was a rabbi in Hungary, in Erloi, that he gave a green light for leaving the last few lines of a tractate for a siyum. And I was able to verify that that's true because an uncle of mine is a grandson of this Reb Shimon Sofer. He was a great rabbi in Hungary, lived to age 95, died in the spring of 1944 in Auschwitz in the gas chambers. So my uncle mentioned that that's indeed the case, that that's the tradition in their family. So that is considered acceptable. But a siyum maseches, bottom line, and what's relevant for us is that if you have a tractate that you completed and you want to go ahead and make a siyum maseches, that is considered a sudas mitzvah. And therefore, the tradition, the custom of avoiding fleishik during the 9 days, since it is post-Talmudic, it is acceptable to eat your fleishik meal for a siyum. And so too the Ramah continues that another example of a Sudas mitzvah where Fleishik would be acceptable is Sudas Erusin, an engagement party. In such gatherings, Ochlin, Bosar, Shosim, Yain, it's acceptable. Kol hashayachim l'suda, anyone that has anything to do with the meal can go ahead and participate. Now, the question is, wait a second. How could the Ramah tell us that a Sudas mitzvah, where it would be acceptable to go ahead and eat fleshik is a Sudas Erusin, when earlier the Mechaber of Yosef Karo tells us, Ein osin Sudas Erusin. And the Ramah does not disagree with that detail. The Ramah does not disagree with that detail. And if so, how on earth can the Ramah tell us that that's an acceptable type of meal for fleshiks when the meal itself is unacceptable? This is very problematic. To such an extent that Mogen Avram says that you got to erase these words. So this was a big debate, a big question. So Zaidi, my Zaidi, Manis, shared with me an answer, a cute answer, and it works as follows. My Zaidi said that in the earlier editions of Shulchan Aruch, the word Sudas Erusin did not apply, but rather the words were Sudas mitzvah like Mila Pidyon Ben Siyum Maseches Ve Samach Aleph. In other words, in the original version, or perhaps in the early manuscripts, it was Kegon. In other words, what would be an example of a Sudas mitzvah? Pidyon Mila, Pidyon Aben, V'siyum Masechet, V'samach Aleph. And the Vav Samach Aleph stood for V'sfarim Acherim, and other books, meaning not just a siyum of a tractate in the Talmud, but even a siyum of Sfarim Acherim, that too would be a valid siyum. Eventually, at some point, someone deciphered this Samach Aleph, but they deciphered it wrong, from Sfarim Acherim to Seudas Erusin. That's my Zaydi's answer. It sounded so cute and amazing, but my feeling is that that's incorrect. Why? Because I saw in earlier rabbinic sources that predate the Ramah the exact same word, Seudas Erusin. And it's hard to believe that everyone made the mistake. So it's a cute insight, but not the emes. What is the emes? In other words, so how do we explain this contradiction? So I'll share with you my thought, and I think that my explanation is actually a precise one. The Ramah got many of his traditions. In other words, the Ramah was not just a great rabbi who was knowledgeable of Talmud that wanted to guide people with things he felt, but the Ramah had a tremendous amount of respect for minhagim, for customs. Minhagim. And the Ramah believed that if there's a minhag, even if it seems questionable, God forbid to question it, because Yisrael, Kedoshim Hem, the people of Israel are holy, and if they have a minhag, we follow and continue with that minhag. Now, the Ramah himself lived in Poland, in Krakow. And in Krakow, in the 16th century, many of the minhagim were based on an old Sefer Minhagim that was written by a rabbi by the name of Rav Isaac Tirno. Rav Isaac Tirno, some believe that he was actually from Tirno in Hungary, which would make him one of the earliest Hungarian rabbis. So Rav Isaac Tirno's Sefer Minhagim was in many ways the foundation for the Ramah to build his building. Okay? Rav Isaac Tirno shares with us the following, and you should know, many of our minhagim today date back to Rav Isaac Tirno, and the first example will be the first liner. Rav Isaac Tirno tells us, Ein mistaprim meyudzayin betamuz ad achar Tisha B'Av. Rav Isaac Tirno tells us no haircuts from the 17th of Tammuz until after Tisha B'Av. He is the first one that mentions it, or probably one of the earlier ones, I shouldn't say first. But the Ramah, when he tells us not to get our haircuts from the 17th of Tammuz, it's quoting Rabbi Isaac Tirna. Okay? Now, Rabbi Isaac Tirna continues, and he tells us the following, that you should know, V'yesh, there are those, she'ein ochlin basar, there are those that don't eat meat, ve'ein shotin yain, and they don't drink wine, from when? Miyudzain betamuz, from Shivos or Betamuz, no fleishiks. Ad Shabbat Nachamu, not just until Tisha B'Av, but until after Tisha B'Av, until Shabbos Nachamu. Okay? Now, it appears that in several communities, there was such a tradition to avoid meat and wine from Shivos or Betamuz. And it was based on the idea that on the 17th of Tammuz, due to the breach of the wall of Jerusalem, they were no longer offering sacrifices. And they were no longer doing the wine libations. So since they did not have the korbanos, and they did not have the nesachim, we commemorate that tragic event by not consuming meat and wine. There was such a practice. And nevertheless, Rabbi Isaac Tirna tells us, I don't have that section here, that if you are participating in a Sudas Mitzvah, you could have fleishiks. One of the examples of an acceptable Sudas Mitzvah before Rosh Chodesh Av is a Sudas Erusin. So therefore it works as follows. When Shulchan Aruch tells us you don't do a Sudas Erusin, that's after Rosh Chodesh Av. When the Ramah mentions that it would be acceptable to have fleishiks at a Siyum Masechet or at a Sudas Erusin, that is talking about in communities when they already avoid meat, right? When they already avoid meat from Shivos or Betamuz, such communities, we're being told, such communities can eat meat they could have meat if it is a Seudas Erusin. Okay, that's an explanation that's given. So here we go. So to clarify, when the Mechaber tells us Ein Osim Seudas Erusin, that's after Rosh Chodesh Av. When the Ramah seems to indicate that you could do a Seudas Erusin, that is for those communities that didn't eat fleishiks from Shivos or Betamuz until Rosh Chodesh Av, those communities can eat meat if it's a Seudas Erusin. Fine? So that's what we have up until this point. Now, the next discussion we're going to have relates to the Sephardim in the land of Israel. As you know, unfortunately, the concept of racism, which is discussed today in depth, and it's something the media is obsessed with. In other words, it's very fascinating in the news that if a white person, let's say, punches someone anywhere in North America, let's say in the United States, a white person punches another person. If the person being punched was white, it's not news. If the person being punched is black, it is news, right? And immediately it's headlines and racism. So there's a lot of focus on race. Obviously, there's a lot of room for improvement for all humans. The concept of becoming better is very Jewish. So if the police wants to become better, I think they should become better. All humans should become better. I have no problem with improving all of it. At the same time, within our Jewish world, unfortunately, there was some level of looking down at the Sephardim at the early days of the Jewish state. It's a fact that the establishment, the Ben Gurion establishment, looked at Sephardim as second-class citizens. No question about it. And it even made its way into rabbinic circles, that the Sephardim were not respected as much. if you ever read up on the tragic events that occurred in the early days of the state with the children that came from Yemen, that were taken from families, and basically it was all part of that culture that the left wing labor socialist secular Israelis looked down at these primitive Yemenites and primitive Sephardim and felt that they have to bring them into the 20th century with some very problematic decisions made. And part of the reason that Menachem Begin was able to come to power was because he had an understanding that a Jew is a Jew, that there's no such thing as a second-class citizen if they are members of our nation. In 1981, just a little bit of politics, in 1981, Begin was running for re-election. It was tough. The situation with the economy was not great. And it appeared that Shimon Peres was going to be elected prime minister. A few nights before the election, there was a rally in Tel Aviv. And in the rally in Tel Aviv, and this is something that happens often in Israel, that someone from the left gets up and says something very stupid, and it hurts the left when they were basically ready to win the election. So I still remember it, and it's something that is well known in Israeli history, that in 1981 at the left, at the Labor Ma'arach party rally, a comedian by the name of Dudu Topaz gets up and he said, the Likud people, they're very primitive. And he talked about the chach-chachim shel Likud. The word chach-chach is a derogatory term given to Sephardim in Israel. And he gets up and he talks about the chach-chachim of the Likud. Menachem Begin, when he heard it, he realized that, number one, it's wrong, but number two, this is an opportunity. So a few nights later, when there was Likud's rally, and obviously a very high percentage of the ones present there were Sephardim, so Begin quoted this comedian, and then Begin started giving it to him, and he said, "You should know that in the days leading to the establishment of the state, there were two fellows that were caught by the British who fought for the Lehi. I think it was Barzini and Feinstein were their name. And before they were supposed to be hung by the British, they killed themselves together." And Begin points out that they were Ashkenazim, Sfaradim, Achim. Begin yelled out, and Begin knew how to perform better than anyone else. And Begin cried out, "They're brothers. For us, Likudnikim, there's no such thing as Ashkenazim, Sfardim. We're Klal Yisrael. We're one unit." And Begin won the election after that. So obviously he was deserving. And obviously for us Torah Jews, we understand that there's no such thing as viewing any Jew as second class. And what's fascinating in Israel is if you look at the power of Shas, you're familiar with Aryeh Deri's party, and think about it, it's quite incredible. It's a party that didn't exist in 1983 in the Knesset. There was no Shas. And now there's Shas, and I think they have 15 or something seats. Like, I don't know the numbers exactly, but it's a very significant party. Maybe not 50, maybe 8, whatever it is. It's a very significant party. And the credit goes to one person, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef. And Rabbi Ovadia Yosef was the one who brought back Sephardi pride. He brought the pride back after years of mistreatment from the establishment. And unfortunately, the establishment includes, in some ways, in the yeshivas itself. Rabbi Ovadia Yosef said, we're going to do it the Sephardi way. And the greatest example of Rabbi Ovadia Yosef and his attitude that we're going to do it the Sephardi way and no one's going to tell me what to do. And by the way, when it comes to knowledge and scholarship, no one matched Rabbi Ovadia Yosef. I sit with a computer, right? And I sit with my Bar Ilan and I could search. And it's amazing that the human mind was able to do what a computer does, like Rabbi Ovadia Yosef. So what we're going to do is we're going to study a responsa from Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, and with the background, with the knowledge of his attitude, you will fully appreciate what this responsa is about. Now, when the Jewish state was established, they put in, they had the rabbinates. There's a chief rabbinate, there's an Ashkenazi chief rabbi, and the Rishon LeZion, the Sephardi chief rabbi. At times, there are different minhagim, different customs. Ashkenazim have their customs, Sephardim have their customs. And now the question is, yes, you could have shuls following their own nusach, but here and there, if you have a central hub for both, who are you going to follow? So the issue related specifically, we're going to be talking about Tel Aviv. That Tel Aviv has a rabbinate in 1948, and they have to decide if they're going to register weddings, which means sending a rabbi out to perform a wedding from Shivas or B'Tammuz to Rosh Chodesh, meaning everyone agrees that a rabbinate is not going to allow weddings from Rosh Chodesh Av to Tisha B'Av. But the question is, can you have weddings? Can you have weddings from Shivas or B'Tammuz until Rosh Chodesh? Since the establishment was based on Ashkenazi authorities, so it became a rule in Tel Aviv, and I assume in all other municipalities, that they are not going to register weddings from Shivas or B'Tammuz on. So even if you are a Sephardi, where there is no minhag, you are 100% allowed to get married, the Rabbanut said, nope, you can't. Fine. In the early 1960s, that's somewhere between 1962, 64, maybe 65, the young Rabbi Ovadia Yosef becomes chief rabbi of Tel Aviv. And he was already recognized as a great scholar. And the first thing he did was he changed the policy. And he said Sephardim could go ahead and have weddings until Rosh Chodesh Av. No such minhag of preventing it from Shivas or B'Tammuz. Some people claimed, wait a second, Rabbi Ovadia, you're changing a minhag, right? The minhag was that even Sephardim don't have weddings in Tel Aviv. So Rabbi Ovadia Yosef writes in his long tshuva the following, that you should know that it is yadua, it is known, she'arabanim harashiim asfaradim, when it comes to Sephardi rabbis, who were shekidmuni, the ones that were before me, they were mikaf kaifi, like the word kafuf, they were subservient, or perhaps a better word would be that they had to just, bend over to what the Ashkenazim wanted. Le'amiteihem harabanim harishkenim Ashkenazim. And he shares historically, Rabbi Uziel was secondary to Rav Kook. Okay? And then he shares in parentheses that, by the way, we're not going to go ahead and read through the whole parentheses, but rather he tells us that Rabbi Uziel was a Sephardi chief rabbi, was so accommodating to the Ashkenazim that at some point he even had a desire that all Sephardi shechita practices will be set aside to have unity, that you should have one system of shechita, and he was willing to accept all the Ashkenazi practices. And Rabbi Ovadia tells us that it's interesting that one who said to the Sephardi rabbi, don't change, you must stay with your old traditions, was Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank. Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank, the great rabbi of Yerushalayim, where he said the following, that if the Sephardi Rabbanim yivatru, if they're going to go ahead and give up on their minhagim, akum ani ve'argen shchita Sfaradit, I'm going to be the one to establish a Sephardi shchita. Meaning, Rabbi Frank recognized that it is unacceptable for Sephardim to stop their practices. Now, that's in parentheses, but what Rabbi Ovadia wants to tell us is that historically, and he continues, there was a rabbi by the name of Toledano, who was chief rabbi in Tel Aviv. He too was secondary and was not able to lift his head to Rav Unterman, okay? And then Rebbe Ovadia Yosef continues, and he says to us, but it's hard to read this, that the Metzias, the reality was that the Sephardim couldn't make a move because the Ashkenazim were sholtim al harabanim. You know what sholet means? Sholet? They controlled. The Sephardim were controlled by the Ashkenazim. And therefore, regarding our issue, when it comes to recording a wedding or performing a wedding, Roshmei HaNisuin, the Sephardim had no choice, they had to follow the Ashkenazim. V'nigu akol keminag b'nei Ashkenaz. They had no choice, no brera. They had to follow what the Ashkenazim did. And so you're going to ask, why did they keep quiet? Why didn't they start yelling? Why didn't they bang their fist to the table? So he says, Lema'an shalom shatku. They had, for the sake of peace, they were quiet. Comes Rebbe Ovadia Yosef and tells us that when someone forces a practice upon you, that is not called a minhag. Ubekahai gavna, in such a scenario, vadai delo chashiv minhag. It's not considered a minhag when something is forced upon you. If the Ashkenazim don't allow you to do things the way you want, for Sephardim, they wanted to perform weddings from Shiva Asar B'Tammuz to Rosh Chodesh. The Ashkenazim did not let. That is not a minhag. Comes Rav Ovadia and he says, Aval anan, but we, now the we is the me. Rav Ovadia Yosef is talking about himself. Deloi kaifinan, I'm not kafuf. I'm not secondary to anyone. I don't budge. I don't bend over for anyone because Rav Ovadia recognizes that he's on a different level. No Ashkenazim can compete with him. And he says that he's very grateful to the Almighty. And he said, Toda leHashem itbarach. Thank God. So therefore, due to the fact that I don't have to budge and bend over to the Ashkenazi, al mishmarti amoda, I'm going to stand guard. I'm going to stand guard lehachzir atara leyoshna, to return the crown to the olden days, to Sephardi practices. And Rav Ovadia Yosef believed that Sephardim actually have more of a right in Israel than Ashkenazim, because Rav Yosef Karo was a Sephardi, and he was the authority in Israel. So he believed that what the Ashkenazim were doing was unfair and wrong. And therefore he says, I'm going to return the crown to olden days. And by the way, these words, lehachzir atara liyoshna, is the motto of Shas. We're going to return the crown to Sephardi pride. And boy, has it been successful to return Sephardi pride, because they have Sephardi power. So therefore he says, lehorot kedat Maran, I'm going to paskin like Maran. Maran here refers to Rabbi Yosef Karo, who was of the opinion that weddings could be performed up until Rosh Chodesh Av, shekibalnu oratav, that we accepted his psakim. And therefore he says, regarding a Sephardi, Habal shanot, if any Sephardi wants to change what I've done, lahachmir, you know what he's doing? Chet rabim nasa, it's a sin. Rabbi Ovadia Yosef believed, and he's actually 100% correct, that delaying weddings is not a good thing, right? If a young couple, a Sephardi young couple, wants to get married before Rosh Chodesh, and for them it's permissible, to delay it because of some Ashkenazi practice is absurd. So therefore, Ovadia, and he deserves a tremendous amount of credit, and it shows that he's using his greatness the proper way. So therefore, no way will he accept any change. Abal shanot lachmir. Yado ala tachtona, he has the bottom hand. I have the upper hand. Sephardi pride returning. This is a beautiful part of Rabbi Yosef, of Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, and there's a reason he is considered nowadays the Maran Ovadia Yosef. The last section is just a halacha that relates to the 9 days. That there's a statement in the Jerusalem Talmud where there are two ways to read it. And based on each way, there's a series of practices. Now, the statement in the Jerusalem Talmud is, with one reading is, Nahagu nashi, women have a custom, delo lemishte imra, not to go ahead and take the warp threads and place them in the loom. Okay, delo lemishti. Lemishti is like the spread out. Imra means semer. So this is a reading of the Jerusalem Talmud, and based on that, women historically during the 9 days did not crochet and did not sew garments. Delo lemishti imra. Okay, nagunashi delo lemishti imra. Now, based on that statement, the custom is that we don't buy new clothes, even things that are not shechianu. In other words, if you want to buy new undershirts, it is 100% permissible to do it until Rosh Chodesh Av, because yes, there's an Ashkenazi practice to not say shechianu, but shechianu is not said on undershirts. A suit and a dress is not to be purchased from Shivas or Betanmuz on, but undershirts would be fine. However, due to this statement, that women did not make new clothes, so the authorities note that there's also a tradition not to buy new clothes. However, there's another reading of that Jerusalem Talmud that changes one letter. Nahagun nashi, listen to this reading. Delo lemishti chamra, not to drink wine. So this is, by the way, the source of not drinking wine during the 9 days and not eating meat. And if you're going to ask why specifically the women, well, different explanations are given. But bottom line is that one statement with the two reading brought about two practices that we are very, very familiar with for the 9 days. So that's a little bit of our learning that we have for the 9 days. Next week, we will not have a class. It's a fast day, Shivos or B'Tammuz. Those that are healthy should fast. Those that are on medication, they should ask a shaila before they decide to fast. We're going to continue Mitzvah Hashem the week after that. And on Be'ezras Hashem, towards the end of July, on the 23rd, I'm going to have a lecture, a very interesting lecture that's not so much halacha, but more information will be coming. So right now, we'll stop the recording. So thank you for